How many of you like to hear your own voice? We have one Donald Trump in here anyway. I think one of the most awkward things for most of us, it used to be when someone tape recorded us. And then it would play back and be like, oh, is that me? No way. And then it went on, if you're old enough, in my generation, it was the VCRs and the big cameras. And now, man, it's so easy. But even with the selfie videos, I know most people don't like to see the playback because you pick up on all sorts of things that you didn't realize, right? It's probably not just videos, recordings. For a lot of us, we're really sensitive about pictures. So if someone takes a picture of us, we either get angry because we didn't want them to. We want it to be a perfect picture. So if we weren't quite ready, we have them delete it and take another picture because we're super self-conscious about how we sound, how we look, how we act. Maybe for some of us, that's even a job review. That when that time of year comes and your boss is going to speak into your life about how your year was, you get really nervous. Because all of these things, a video, an audio, a job review, are all reflections of who we are. And sometimes those can be pretty tough. It can be rough. I will never forget when I was in elementary school, I spent Tuesday afternoons after lunch and before walking home at New Searles Elementary School, I think in second and third grade, with Duso the dolphin. Duso the dolphin was a speech therapist's tool to help me say certain sounds. I still have trouble with my R's, sometimes with my L's. And Duso the dolphin was supposed to help me with that. Well, you can imagine having those years, none of my friends had to go, they didn't call it speech therapy back then. They had a different word for it. None of my friends had to go visit Duso the dolphin, just Scott. You know, that was my time. And I remember being thoroughly embarrassed that I had to go. I remember some of the feelings of, oh no, it's Tuesday. I've got Duso. And I loved the dolphin. He was cute. But just being separated like that was really uncomfortable. Guess what I'm still very sensitive about today? Dolphins. I'm still super sensitive about my speech. I just am. Probably will be for the rest of my life. In fact, I not only struggle with this as an adult, but this week I had this semi-awesome experience. How many of you listen to WTSN in the morning? Some of us do. I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday morning, one of the mornings midweek. I drive Ethan into school, and this is how it looks. I drive Ethan, and over in the passenger seat, pretty much every day. And we're driving in, and I tend to listen to TSN to kind of see what's going on in our area. And Mike Pomp is on there, and he said, all right, the third caller, free tickets to Loon. Well, Loon Mountain is like my joy. I'm like, no way, this has got to be for me. So my truck doesn't have Bluetooth. So I picked up my phone and I called. All right, shh. Don't tell anyone that. So I called WTSN. It rang. No one answered. I'm like, oh, yeah, all right. Hung up. I said, I'll give it another shot. Redialed. Hi, you've reached Mike Pomp. I'm like, Mike Pomp! That's awesome! And he says, you're the third caller. Can I have your name? I had to repeat my name to him 3 times on the phone because I have trouble with my L sounds sometimes. To the point that I almost wanted to give up the loon tickets because it was my sensitive area. I had to repeat it 3 times, and then he asked my address. And if you know my address begins with L2. I had to repeat that at least 3 times, and I wasn't sure that we actually were going to get the ticket sent to the right house. And I ended that phone call thankful that we just got a couple tickets because my family loves to ski, but also all of my past spinning up. Some of you have had similar experiences, haven't you? I'll give you one more example. A few years ago, we went up to Cannon Mountain. They have a special deal. You pay for 1 ticket, you get 2 if you're a New Hampshire resident, or somewhere you get a pretty cheap deal. And so Ethan and I were up there, and we're just getting our ski stuff on. And I hear someone kind of behind me say, "Scott Littlefield." And I turn, and I don't recognize this fellow. And then he says, "I would recognize that voice anywhere." He's just being kind. He's just interacting with me. He's someone that had popped in, or I just didn't recognize him, but I had met him a few times, and he had remembered me. And guess what sprung up at that moment? All my years of course you'd recognize this voice. Many of us have very similar experiences. Maybe some of you have always felt you're not pretty enough. Maybe some of you have always felt, I'm not tall enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not good enough. Maybe there's something in your past too that you can relate. And now maybe for some of you as you're getting up in years, there's another layer. I'm not young enough. And we begin to pile things on. And in those moments, you and I can feel helpless, inadequate, maybe even ashamed of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And maybe even deep down inside, you just have this lingering question, why did God design me this way? I wish He hadn't. In fact, for some of us, the shame is clearer than others. And this is a little too intimate. Sometimes I have you interact with one another. I'm not going to have you do that because this one would be hard. But if you could design the perfect you, all right? The perfect you, what would be required to change in order for you to be the perfect you? What would that be? Obviously for me, one would be my voice, my speech. I would definitely change that. I wonder what that would be for each of you. In that helplessness, things that you just can't change, I want you to turn to the passage that Allie just read in John chapter 5. John chapter 5. Going to read about a pretty dismal life here. Verse 1. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Do we still have places where those on the fringes of society lie? The blind, the paralyzed, the dying, the sick. We still tend to group those people together. A lot of it is helpful. They need medical care, and so they go to a nursing home or a rehab facility. Maybe for others, they're dangerous in who they are. And so we have prisons. I'm just saying that this isn't as unique maybe as it sounds. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed, those who are on the fringes of society, oftentimes you'll find them together somewhere. This happens to be a pool. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. 38 years. How dismal would life have been? What have you already done this morning? I mean, here it is, 10 o'clock in the morning. What have you already done? For me, I showered this morning. Check. Brushed my teeth. Read a little bit. Drove here early. Got communion prepared. And now here I am after worshiping, preaching. Later today, depending on weather, we may do some stuff. I'll get Ethan down to his discipleship group later. We have our small group later this evening. I've got a fairly full day. 38 years of nothing. Nothing. Can you imagine that? It's odd for me, and maybe for a lot of guys, I don't know, maybe women, you have the same thing. It's an odd sensation when a day rolls like a Saturday and there's nothing on the calendar and there's no particular project to engage in. It's a weird feeling like, I've got nothing to do today. And for a lot of guys, that can drive us stir crazy, and so we make up projects to engage in. 38 years, this man did one thing. We don't know how, but somehow his mom, a neighbor, a friend, somebody dragged him from wherever he lived over to the pool. Somehow he got there. And for 38 years, every single day, he would lie by the side of the pool. And that was his life. You talk about a man who's got to feel helpless. What have you done the past 38 years? A whole lot. I mean, we could share stories upon stories. Some of them are great. Some of them are really abysmal. Some of them brought great joy. Some brought great pain. Things have changed. Things you never thought of, never dreamed of. And nothing changed for this fellow. For 38 years, he's lying there. Life, I've got to imagine, it's just this perpetual fog of hopelessness. I don't think this fellow was laying by the pool dreaming, oh, God, what do you have in store for me today? Oh, Lord, let me put my faith in you that you may change my tomorrows. I know you have a good plan and a good hope and a good future for me, God. He's not there at all. He's simply in this helpless, sorry state. It's always winter, but never Christmas. Verse 6. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Is that a ridiculous question? Do you want to get well? On the surface, it seems pathetic, right? If you're honest. Well, what kind of invalid who's been laying by a pool for 38 years doing nothing, all of his dreams are dashed, he doesn't even dream anymore. What kind of guy is going to be like, no thanks, I don't really want to get well, right? How many of you have lived with something for years and years and years to the point that you now describe it, this is who I am? Have you ever been there? Maybe someone confronts you on your anger. Maybe it's your wife, maybe it's a close friend, maybe a pastor challenges something, and the response very easily can come back, oh, you just need to accept that because this is who I am. Do you want to get well? Well, I'm not sure anything can ever change at my age. And all of a sudden, the question makes a little more sense. Do you want to get well? He asks. To which the man who's become very comfortable being a victim answers Jesus. Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. There are certainly huge questions. One of the verses that King James has in that NIV and other translations take out, without going into some of the biblical criticism, there's ways you can tell if verses are genuine or if they were redacted, changed, added later in time. There's some good historical methods to do that. And most versions say, no, there's one verse in here that just, it not only doesn't fit, the textual evidence isn't there to support it. But that verse, if you have King James, speaks about an angel coming down, touching the water and stirring it, so that if you're sick, if you're an invalid, you're blind, you're paralyzed, at that moment after the angel touches the water, if you dive in first, you're healed. Whole lot of questions on, all right, what's happening with this water? It's being stirred and there's some healing properties to this. I wish I had great answers for you. I don't know, other than God was using this pool for something in healing. I don't know exactly what that looked like. But if you notice, the invalid answers Jesus' question, do you want to get well? With an excuse. He answers the question with an excuse. Have you grown comfortable in a pattern in life? Have you grown comfortable with one of your deficiencies? Have you grown comfortable being a victim to the point that if anyone asks if you want to be well, what you're going to answer is to offer an excuse? Because sometimes I think we become a victim to hide our shame, and where everything, the whole world around us, becomes all about my deficiency, my inadequacy, and how I'm going to hide that is blame you and blame everyone around me and play the victim here in the middle, which is exactly what this guy is doing. Well, Jesus, I can't make it to the pool. I mean, I really, really want to, but no one ever comes to pick me up. I never get any help. Someone else always beats me there. My marriage is perennially in trouble. I don't think I can ever change. I've tried a whole lot of times, and nothing is ever going to happen here. Frowns and depression sometimes are easier than risking anything else. This guy spits out a whole bunch of excuses why he can't. I try, but someone beats me. I'm always left out. I can't get my act together. I was born this way. It's my parents' fault. Every time I try to change something, it all goes downhill anyway. My husband is too selfish. I'm too busy. And on and on and on, you and I go. And the reality is this cripple's excuse right? Yeah. For 38 years, the poor guy's been laying by the pool. No one has helped him get into the pool in time to incur any healing. The reality is, his excuse actually is right on. And yours might be too. You might be in a place where that's become who you are. You might be in a place where your husband, your wife is so critical that it's hard for you to imagine anything else. You might be in a place where things are so miserable around you that it's hard to find joy. Your excuses might actually be right on. Except one thing that we've forgotten, that this guy didn't take into account. Jesus is right there. Jesus is right there. Verse 8. Then Jesus said to him, get up, pick your mat, and walk. And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. He picked up his mat and he walked. And in that moment, that fog of helplessness, the identity that he knew for 38 years just dissipated. It blows up where everything is different. It's like a new day comes, a new creation as Jesus walks into his life. And as Jesus tells him to pick up his mat and walk, he's cured. What kind of mental image do you have of that moment? What does this man look like in your mind? And what's he doing in that moment? Is he sad? Is he angry? Is he happy? Is he rejoicing? Dancing, walking, running, sludging? What's that scene look like to you? Because I think maybe for the first time in nearly 4 decades, I think the man might be cracking a smile. I think maybe for the first time some hope is beginning to come in. And the story ends with the point of the passage. Because there are always people, when you have a speech impediment, when you're not pretty enough, when you're not strong enough, successful enough, when you have an addiction, when you've been abused, there are always people, when you take that step to say, but that will not define me, there are always people willing and ready to put you back in your place and say, you can't do that. You can't do that. This paralyzed man has it. Verse 10. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, you can't do that. You can't pick up your mat and walk, dude. Where's the celebration? Is there even a moment where these religious guys are like, that's awesome. Look at you. You're running, you're happy, you're joyful. Was there ever a moment, I'm so glad that you're mentoring the abused victims now. I know your story. That's so incredible that Jesus has given you the strength to overcome your victimhood, to help those who are going through tough times. I'm so excited that at age 75, you're taking that great step of faith. Jesus changes even people in their 70s. That's awesome. Is there ever a moment? No. Because religious guys, they're the worst put back in your place guys ever. Because it's all about the law. These guys are like, hey, it's a Sabbath. You can't carry your mat. Go back to the pool. Go back to where you were. That's where you really belong. Verse 11, but he replied, well, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, well, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. But later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, see, you're well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. The law, many of us this morning, as your pastor, have seen it. Up here, you want to believe that Jesus is good enough, that you don't need to be good enough. That Jesus paid for it all, that I don't need to be religious enough to please God. Up here, you want to believe that. But down here where it counts, you can't escape that gnawing feeling that you're not good enough. And that I need to be better. And when you're in that place where you need to try to please God by doing what God says to earn His favor, because if I'm bad, my Father is going to look at me and be angry at me. When you're in that place, you're in the place of the law. The law is about, if you keep these commandments, all 364 of them, if you keep them, you're on God's side, and if you don't, man, you are in trouble. And you've got to go through a whole bunch of ceremonies to try to get better. Which is exactly what these religious guys were doing. Here's how it rolls out for us. If our life with Jesus is all about how good can I be? What kind of bad things am I not going to do, or what kind of good things am I going to do? This closet here is going to be super, super relevant for you. Because everything that we fear is going to get stuffed in here and hidden. And so I'm not going to tell you about my weaknesses. I'm not going to share my struggles. I'm not going to share my sins. I'm going to stuff it all in here. And in that moment, as I close the door, I'm going to walk out in front of you with this layer of shame, hoping that you don't discover it. And sometimes that shame is not of your doing. It's a speech impediment. It's a physical property. It's something about you that you didn't choose, but it's happened to you, that you put away, that you don't recognize. These guys from the law, they give the guy the law, you can't do this on the Sabbath. And I think Jesus makes clear the law serves one great purpose. The law serves one great purpose. That grace would be all the more enticing. That in that moment of you can't do this, when grace appears to say, you can. You can. Because your God loves you and your God accepts you. And all the penalty for all the things you've stuffed in the closet have been nailed to a cross and paid for. That you're a forgiven, loved child of the King. That grace brings joy, law brings guilt. Grace brings passion and enthusiasm for living, where the law just brings hiding and despair. Jesus could have given in to the excuses, when the guy's like, I don't know, I've tried this for like 38 years. I can't really get better. Jesus, I think, could have been like, all right, good enough. I'm out. But he didn't, because he loved the man too much. And he loves you too much to leave you hiding behind the excuses of your helplessness. He loves you too much to leave you hiding behind the excuses of your helplessness. Hiding in the shame of who you're not. Or the shame of who you are. To the point that you may not believe God really wants to use you. So here's how we roll out. I don't know if there's anything more crippling to me or more crippling to you than shame. Shame will always freeze you right where you are. It always will. But when you, deep down inside, begin to truly, authentically believe that when Jesus steps in, he steps in with grace. Oh, there's a moment. There's a moment in there. There's a moment when joy erupts on the scene, where a paralyzed beggar gets up and takes up his mat and walks. There's a moment when those who have said, you're divorced, so you can't serve in leadership, all of a sudden becomes a moment of, well, God has paid for that. And I'm free to serve my Lord. There's a moment when people say, well, you're not really ever going to get married. You're not really ever going to have those dreams. You're not really ever going to step forward in faith because of who you are. So you have the moment of clarity. In grace, I know who I am. And it's not that. I'm not a lame beggar by the pool for 38 years. I'm a child of God ready to get his mat and walk because the grace of Jesus has met me. And so we come to church to celebrate, to share in this life-altering grace, that we share it in community together, sharing stories, praying, celebrating, singing, listening, eating together, practicing for the kingdom life to come. You have so much to offer if you're willing to let grace reign in your lives. You have so much that Jesus can set you free from the burden if you let grace in. You can be praying for your leaders. Elizabeth, Jeff, and I got together Wednesday, and so I'm about to take our escape route right out. I was telling the story, Cindy, of coming up to Loon Mountains, only double black diamond, and I never knew that there's this little trail that leads you out until Cindy's like, I don't know, maybe we should take that trail. And I was like, what trail? The escape trail, it's right there. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. So I was telling them the story because I want an escape trail, and I'm about to close the door on the escape here. You can be praying for your leaders. I'm convinced that until we're open with each other, that this whole series will mean nothing, that shame will continue to lurk, that we'll keep our closets locked and no one come in, and those who can release you are your leaders who set the pace. And so Jeff, Elizabeth, and I said, all right, Easter morning, we're doing something that is super, super scary. Super scary. But I think super awesome too. Because no matter what people think, no matter how we interact with it, the reality is grace needs to reign. And grace needs to be allowed in. And so we're going to open ourselves up in a way maybe we've never opened up to you on Easter morning. Because the resurrection changes all of that. It changes it all. Let me pray, invite our worship. Actually, we're going to go right to communion. It's 2 weeks in a row I did that. Let me pray. Father, I can't help but think that your heart for us is so much larger than we can imagine. God, we know that you're able to do more than we ever could ask or imagine. And so even this morning, the inadequacies we have, the failures that lie in our past, the things we're embarrassed of, the things that have kept us back, the characteristics we wish were different. Oh Lord, would you share your Holy Spirit to empower us to, instead of simply seeing those, to experience your grace, to maybe even use our weakness for your glory and your strength. Lord, I thank you. You've taken a kid who had a tough time speaking and gave him a position of speaking a lot. Lord, I thank you that you took a paralyzed man by a pool and gave him a testimony out into his community. Lord, I thank you for the tough things that have happened to my brothers and sisters in the pews this morning. The times we would never choose to repeat. The characteristics we would wipe away if we could. God, I thank you for them, that you'll use them for mercy and grace to others and to be a testimony of who you are. Oh, Lord, would you give our hearts the courage to take the step towards you? God, thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.